And friends, thanks for being here. I know we'll probably have others come in. Uh, and I see we had a new a friend join us, but she's dropped off. I hope she'll be back. Marianne Fitzsimmons. Um, and I can't see who's in the meeting house. My apologies for having to join you remotely today. There's Marianne. And so who's in the meeting house today? Can we just go around and say names in the meeting house and then maybe here on screen?
Brian Dutcher.
Brett.
Mary Hampton.
Is that?
That's it. That's
Okay, and here on screen we've got, of course, I'm Howard Hawhey, and people just want to pipe up when, as led here. I'm not going to call on folks.
Marianne Fitzsimmons, and this is my first session. I'm happy to be here.
This is Ed joining on Zoom. Sorry I couldn't make it today.
Okay, well, but any other name will do it.
And I see Paul there too, Paul Pierce. Hey, Paul.
Yes, hello.
So this morning's session, we are, as we're following along in Rex Ambler's book, The Quaker Way, because of me having a conflict last week, we did a little bit out of order. Mary facilitated chapter 4, which is on making decisions. And now we're jumping back to chapter 3, the title of which is Meeting Others, and meeting in the broad sense. That is, just getting together in the normal sense of things, and then meeting as in meeting for worship, I think is, so it's kind of the community around meeting for worship is, I guess, how I would take this chapter. And because I'm remote, I've got the text of the chapter here screen shared, and we can go through it. But I guess I'd first like, because the title is Meeting Others, and as I said, I think that includes both coming together in community and in meeting for worship, which, as you can all see, is kind of, in one sense, they're parts of the same thing. So the first thing I'd like to do is maybe have a little worship, and then if someone's led, I could start speaking out of that silence, but if someone else is led to, please feel free to do so as well. So let's have a little bit of worship here. Good morning, friends, and welcome to the fourth session, and that makes the third chapter for logistical reasons that we've had of The Quaker Way by Rex Ambler. There's no expectation that you will have read the chapter, but of course, obviously, it's helpful if you have. And I wanted to ask, for those of you who have read the chapter, do you have any remarks in general? And I'll just allow some space for anyone who wants to remark on it. Otherwise, I'll launch into some things here.
Did not pre-read the chapter, but as I was sitting here beginning the meeting this morning, I read the first sentence, that first paragraph or so, and it really did speak quite a bit to me. That where it talks about that of God within each of us, and it talks in this manner. It says, it may be unknown to them, that being that of God within, unrecognized and disregarded, but as soon as they begin to pay attention, it will begin to show itself and show something of their life as well. It's later in the conscious, nudging them on the things they do right and wrong. So they only have to notice and acknowledge it, and they will be able to see things in a different way. They will be on a spiritual journey.
Thanks, Chris. Any other observations or promptings?
I feel like families aren't like how they used to be years ago, where there were many generations together. Now families are so mobile and spread out all over the country, and so I feel like it's very important that we have a group who has similar views we have to make it family.
By to strip ourselves naked, to see ourselves as we are and see others as they really are.
We can. I'll take the friends' observations just now as a jumping off point, and Mary's comment is a good way to flow into a question. And by the way, a logistical question: can people see the text that I'm sharing on the screen? Okay.
Yes.
I'm sharing an electronic version of the book that I have, and that's how I'm able to do this. Okay, and how about the folks in the meeting room? Can you see the text on the screen? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
We all have books.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. And you have books.
Books too.
Great, great. And please, if I'm referring to something on the screen here, because the pagination isn't the same, if you want to sing out the page in the actual paper book, do so as well. I don't have a paper book to hand right now. I'll take what Mary said. That idea of you know, so to speak, stripping ourselves naked and being with each other. You know, in the group as a way of making that connection between at the bottom of that first column on my copy there. It says, "Does this mean that the Quaker journey is essentially an individual?" You might think so from what I've said so far, and he's saying he just wants to emphasize how the individual comes to that, because there's been a tendency to focus on just meeting for worship. But that idea of us making ourselves vulnerable to each other in meeting for worship is, I think, kind of a nexus between that individual journey and our experience as a group. And then he says, why did friends insist on getting together to meet? Even though back in the day it was even harder because travel took a lot longer, you know, and so you might maybe have to travel 4 hours just to get to the meeting house. You know, a 4-hour trip was just a few miles back then. The idea is that, first of all, in a practical sense, friends needed logistical support. They needed physical support with each other, and they were sometimes under persecution for not, joining the established church, and he intimates that here on these following pages. And let me just try something here for myself. Okay. Says page, they quote, "Tender to one another in all convenient outward things, for that is the least love." Our practical needs may not be so urgent as theirs, although I don't know if that's true. It's just different. With our modern support systems, the practical help is still needed, and it still binds us together. We also need each one another socially, perhaps even now more than then. And I know there are those of us present right now who are very aware of and very involved in the practical support of other friends. Does anyone want to speak to that, about that practical support, the practical needs, and how we may fulfill that? I'll just step back again.
So I guess in an official way, the formal way in which we sort of care for each other within the meeting is we have a committee called Care and Counsel. Both Mary and myself serve on this committee. And it's sort of supposed to fulfill part of the function that would, in a lot of churches, be fulfilled by a pastor who's supposed to exercise pastoral care and make sure that the people in the meeting are okay, are well, are getting the support they need, the care they need, and also any financial assistance that the meeting can provide. There's a benevolence fund that Care and Counsel helps to manage. And so that's a very active thing. There's a lot of a lot of need. People are at different stages in their life, and each of those has its own difficulties. We certainly help with sort of the joyous ones, like weddings in particular, and then also people who want to sort of join the meeting, also with sort of memorial service along with worship and ministry, and other concerns as well. Just sometimes people have difficulties with sort of housing or with their employment or with their health, and so we want to really try to be there for each other. And so if you do ever have a need like that, please do feel free to reach out, care@austinquakers.org for that. So that's sort of the official body tasked with that. But then I think there's also the whole community, just in a more informal way, are friends and want to care and look out for each other. So people, I think, talk and share and help each other that way as well.
What are the main ways that you find that people are in need if they don't reach out to the committee directly?
Really, it is people reaching out directly. However, if we are, those of us on the committee will also just keep our ears open, and if people are expressing some real need, then we'll sort of ask in a private sort of gentle way, as like if there's anything that the committee could do to be of support. And sometimes at the end of the meeting as well, people will express sorrows and difficulties in their life to the whole community, and then usually we'll try to follow up with them and make sure that they're getting the support they need.
Do you ever? Oh, sorry.
Appreciated. I'm a person who has received 2 loans, one when my car broke down and I needed it to work, and I paid back that loan, and now I received another one which helped me get a place to live. Greatly appreciated.
That's wonderful. Do the notes at the end of the meeting, the notes of what was said in the keeping in the light phase, I don't know what the real name for that part of the meeting is, are those ever used to reach out to people if they are members and they're on that list? Or is it more like you want it to be like direct connection to the person, not like a referral from a third party?
The latter one. So typically, if someone from the Circle of Light Committee is at the meeting while people are sharing concerns to be held in the light, they'll take notes down and then hold those people in the light. And often, in many cases, that is people talking about someone who's a loved one or a friend of theirs who's having some sort of difficulty that they'd like the community. It's more often if they share some difficulty going on in their own life, or perhaps if it is someone else, maybe like a very close relation, a parent, a spouse or something, it would also still be appropriate for Care and Counsel to reach out to make sure that they're getting the support they need to deal with that difficult situation.
Another thing, very practically, is if it's obvious someone has had a major change in their life. A husband dies. What does it mean to support the remaining member of that family? Somebody goes home from hospital and they're not as fit as they were before.
It's always a tricky balance, and this is a conversation we often have sort of. It's kind of perennial conversation about what does it mean for the meeting to care for someone, for instance, I was married under the care of the meeting, which means that the meeting then it very literally sort of has a care of our marriage and has a responsibility to sort of check in with us and make sure we're getting all the support we need. And though it's an active question what that means in practice. How do you actually do that? We don't want to be unwelcome, invasive, or intrusive in people's lives. Like if you're sort of constantly checking in a way, it could feel like this was sort of maybe unwanted scrutiny or attention from the community. So we don't want to do that. But at the same time, we do feel like we want to have some sort of expression that we are here and available and want to care and are sort of actively engaged in marriages under the care of the meeting, and also with people's lives. Yeah, so it's sort of an ongoing conversation what that care looks like. How much should we proactively reach out to people, and how much is it more just sort of being attentive to what needs arise?
One of the things I've found refreshing as part of this committee is that people who aren't on it will ask me, do you think so-and-so needs X? And usually I say ask them, but kind of making us a little bit of a clearinghouse for it, if you will. But certainly there are friends who are not on Caring Council who are very engaged in supporting other people in the community.
Also, if it's ever a concern, we're also we take confidentiality very seriously as well. So we're just, if there is any need or support, yeah, that's something we keep very closely.
Wow, I'm really glad we have at least a couple members here of the Caring Council Committee this morning. This has really been a good thing to hear about. And I'll just, there's a quote, I think you can all see it on the screen: tender to one another in all convenient outward things, for that is the least love. I also note that, kind of echoing what Irene was saying earlier, her first comment there about that there's that modern life does tend to fragment and isolate us, and there's a need to pull ourselves back together. So much for the spiritual, I mean the practical needs, which can be very immediate, and you need to have, as I say, keep body and soul together. But you see where it says there, at least on my screen, right at the last thing on the screen, is there is a more pressing need to connect with others spiritually, and I like what they say there. If someone could, and I'm having trouble finding my cursor on my screen, my own screen. Would someone, you see where I am on that screen, the part in italics there? Would someone mind reading what's on that screen, either off of the screen or in the appropriate place in the book? And it kind of go ahead.
We need others to mirror back how they see us and to affirm us. Exposure to the light means that we have to see ourselves as we are, to strip ourselves naked. As early friends like to say, and this, as we have seen, can be a difficult experience. Others can help us in this by reflecting back how they see us and accepting us as we are. There's no room for pretense here. On the contrary, the kind of affirmation and acceptance that each of us needs can only be received when we are completely open with one another about how we are. This is given practical expression in the way we sit together in meeting. Should I keep going?
Yes, please.
Facing one another. We do not face an altar or pulpit or image as if what connected us spiritually was something outside us. We are looking to each other in the secret interchange that occurs when we look at one another face to face. Friends have made a point of this even for larger gatherings. They described in their yearly meeting in London as follows: we did conclude among ourselves to settle a meeting, to see one another's faces, and open our hearts one to another in the truth of God once a year, as formerly it used to be.
Thanks. I think that's probably a good morning. I wonder if, as formerly it used to be, they're talking about their idea of what early Christians did, or they're talking about maybe what they as Quakers used to do, although they've only been around for a few years. Not sure what they mean there. I'll just say that I found this passage extremely meaningful, because I hadn't really thought about or given words like this to why we sit facing each other, and why not all friends, but many friends, including sometimes me, keep our eyes open looking at each other. Anyone want to comment on that?
I was just telling my husband that when I could see your Quaker meeting room, that everyone was facing each other, and I told him that's just how it was in the church I went to as a child, but I hadn't thought about that, and it's really striking. We all face each other, whereas any other church experience I've had, we're facing someone else or an altar, like you say.
Thank you.
I'm curious, anyone who has more experience, how they interpret the idea of reflecting back how they see us, like how that's actually done in practice.
I think the first thing, as Howard said, may be sitting with your eyes open. I often look around the room trying to look at each person. And it's not because I'm particularly checking who's here. It's more, I'm trying to be in contact with the people who are in the room. One of the things I like best about Quakers is we don't have anybody who's the expert. We're not religious amateurs listening to a professional. And looking at the other amateurs is very grounding to me.
Or as someone says, it's not that we've abolished the priesthood or the ministry, it's that we've abolished the laity. We're all ministers. We're all pastors in some sense.
I think another aspect that I think about that is that while we're together, there's more power in that, if I can use the word power. Because I think sometimes you don't really know where a leading is going to come from, and sometimes you're not even sure why the leading came. And maybe for somebody else, I've seen that happen. So, there's, and I think that perhaps is the emphasis of meeting together, the sense of the community that there is. There's more presence, when we're together. There's more divine presence, I think.
I often hear people who maybe have never been to a Quaker meeting before and come in for the first time, describe what we're doing as meditation. And I mean, that's a good term, but I think meditation as the term is currently used in our society implies that it's kind of an individual thing. And if that were the case, then I think, as Ambler said maybe a page or two before this, we could all just, you know, it could just be an individual experience, and we could all sit at home and get in touch with the inner light, and that would be that. And it occurs to me that there are reasons why we do this as a group. I don't know if anyone wants to comment on that. You know, obviously, so that we can face each other and reveal ourselves to each other. But does anyone want to comment on why it might be, why we might want to do this as a group as opposed to just, you know, read a whole bunch of books about it and sit at home and do it? Anyone want to comment on that?
Well, in the book it said different people have different measures of the light, and it's nice that anybody can be moved by the Spirit and speak. So we all learn from each other.
Thank you.
Also very new, but when I meditate like at home by myself, I often struggle because it'll just kind of, it's very internal experience, and then I can get lost in my own thoughts and things. And so there's more of a sense of like we're all focusing on the same things. There's more purpose in it when I'm with more people. And so like the first Quaker meeting I went to just a few weeks ago, I was like, wow, I actually feel this sense of centeredness that I haven't felt when I would try and meditate on my own, because that's what my therapist said was the right thing to do. Because it felt closer to how I feel when I'm like in like a office space in like nature, rather than, which is interesting because I'm still in the building and there's no trees around here, but I don't know, everyone being together brought me to that same sense of like peace, and sort of like we're all searching for the same thing.
I like that. The last thing you said, all searching for the same thing. If I were to have to encapsulate, you know, my sense of what we're doing, I'd use that phrase.
One thing that occurs to me from my own experience, I guess I'd like to explain with an analogy. I'm not an artist, but I think like anyone, I have artistic taste. And the gap between, if I tried to make a drawing, the gap between what kind of art I can make and what kind of art I choose to appreciate is very large. And I think there's something similar for me about my like values of how I think about other people and about how I think about myself. I value a lot of empathy and understanding, but I can't always do that on my own. And I find that being in the meeting, the things that people say when they stand up are, you know, could be seen as someone showing the way in a way, because I feel like people stand up and they speak with a lot of empathy and compassion and so on. So for me, one of the reasons that's really useful to be here in a group is getting those examples of people thinking with values that I share in a way that I can't always do myself.
I really like that explanation. That feels really true for me as well.
Yeah, these two friends have spoken my mind, to use a Quaker phrase. And just personally, you know, I'll be in meeting, and I want to get, as the phrase is, I think it's either in this chapter or in the previous one, become still and cool in my thoughts, which sometimes does require a little bit of self-concentration. So I'll close my eyes and to do that, to center down, and then I'll realize it's maybe not working to do that, and my mind is just going somewhere. And so I always, like, at that point, I open my eyes and I look at everybody, and it's like, you know, come on, reel me back in, friends, bring me back. And I find that really, yeah, really helpful. So that's just a, I guess, a real personal kind of experience that I have.
Yeah, I resonate a lot with the parts of the gospel that talk about God is love and that the Spirit is present when we're with each other. And that I think we just can't find that on our own, by ourselves. There's a sort of way in which Spirit enters our lives only in relation to other people, and only in presence of others. And I think being in the presence of others is central and crucial to having a real experience with God and with Spirit.
I guess there's a reason we call it a Quaker meeting, isn't there? Or the term for our group, you know. I think of the verse, you know, where 2 or 3 are gathered together. Somewhere in this chapter, and I'm sorry, I probably, as the facilitator, I should have been a little more on top of this. You know, they allude to, I think, George Fox talking about how the gospel is written on our hearts, not necessarily on paper. There's an episode or an incident from George Fox's journal, where you know, he's always disputing with what they quote unquote at that time professors, which didn't mean people who taught at a university back then, or it might have, I don't know, but it meant people who openly professed to be religious, you know, and were perhaps part of seeking after truth. And professors, in at least in most of Fox's, are not. It's not a positive term necessarily, but he talks about getting into lots of discussions or disputes with quote unquote professors. And in one of these incidents, he says, sometimes he summarizes what went on. He said that the Gospels were Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And I said that the Gospels were what is written on our hearts. And I think that's a real good sort of distinction. Not that he doesn't refer to Scripture, clearly does, to Christian scriptures, and I think in our modern times we'd refer to other scriptures as well. But And in another place, they said, someone says that, a professor says the Bible is the Word of God. And Fox replies, no, the Bible is words about God. Once again, kind of drawing that distinction. I might have taken us a little bit off topic there. I don't know. Sorry about that. In the next little bit, and let me pause here. I didn't want to cut off any of these very fruitful comments that people are making. Is there anything else anyone wanted to say around what we've heard so far, or are we ready to move on to another part of the chapter? There on the screen I just brought up, being written all in one another's hearts, have all one voice and the pure language of truth. Where in plainness of speech things may be spoken in nakedness of heart, one unto another, in the eternal unity of the one Spirit. Wow, that's an awful lofty aspiration to have. It's not emphasized as much here, although they get into it a little bit at the end of the chapter. But one of the other things for me that's important about us doing this, and then the Quaker term often is, we will say as a community, but we'll also say corporately. Not meaning we have a CEO and a CFO and a board of directors, but corporately as a body, that is, and in that sense of corporate. That corporately, we are able to sift through things, and we are able to help each other discern what our promptings and leadings are, and to test those. A friend of ours who's still a friend of the meeting. He was a big part of our meeting membership a few years ago, and he's moved away. I'm sure he won't mind me mentioning his name, Tom Martin. A lot of you know him. He said he was in some sort of an ecumenical gathering, and he had explained to a member of a quote-unquote more organized group about how Quakers look for, we don't look to a creed, we don't look to a set of rules, we look to the promptings of spirit, and that we can discern with each other. And the other person that he was explaining this to said, but how do you know that these promptings that you get aren't from the evil one? And I forget what Tom said he responded, but I would almost say that because every single person is expected to contribute, their measure, I think Irene used that phrase, their measure of the light to what they have. I believe that we, as a body, as a community, are much more likely than many other forms of organization to get to what is right and what is true. And one of the things, and I apologize if I've said this before in a previous session, but one of the things that has always stuck with me is the first time I went to a business meeting. I'd been attending for a while, maybe for a couple months. This was 25, 26 years ago. And someone said, to really find out how things work, you might want to check out a business meeting. So I go to business meeting, and I remember there were two things on the agenda. One thing was, this was in July. One thing was whether we should repair the air conditioner, which seems like a no-brainer in Austin in July. And the other thing on the agenda was that there was going to be a visit to Austin and a speech by Henry Kissinger, and there was going to be civil disobedience at that speech, and the question was whether or not we might contribute to, I think, was a bail fund for people who were expected to be arrested. Well, they had to hold over because we couldn't come to unity on the air conditioner. There were some deep concerns about air conditioning and simplicity and some other things like that that we couldn't come to unity on. We couldn't resolve. But the thing about the bail fund for people getting arrested, that was I mean, everyone was there immediately. We just did it. So it's interesting to see how, as a body, we're able to come to things or not. And something, who knows? I mean, I think we eventually did repair the air conditioner, but it took a few more times. But who knows? I mean, that's pretty scrupulous because it was scruples. It wasn't just, we don't have the money because we did, or anything like that. It was scruples that people had. Whereas everyone was in unity about something that normally I think would be a little more controversial. And I really like the, who knows, maybe repairing the air conditioner was from the evil one. I don't know. I think we came to unity and were able to work through it. That concept of unity, which I'm assuming Mary talked about last week when we talked about decision-making and support there. I want to, and then I'll step back. I've talked a lot. See if anyone else wants to jump in.
I don't know if you've talked about this at all, but I'm curious how people feel. We talked about a lot of corporeality, the importance of being together, of worshiping together, and that sort of format of sitting across from each other. And even as we're doing right now, to sort of state the obvious, we've radically changed this format in the last 3 years. And we now have a significant portion of our community joining us on the internet. And we have these sort of microphones, and it's this is probably the most dramatic change in Quaker worship in probably 300 years that we've just witnessed in the last 3 or 4 years here. So I wonder, I feel like that idea of the corporate worship, the corpus of the body. Are we still one body, but some of our bodies are literally miles and miles away in different places? Do we feel that still that sense of unity and gatheredness? That was a real question and concern when we had to shift entirely into Zoom meeting in the sort of early pandemic days. But it seemed to work well enough that we've persisted and even sort of just made that now a regular part of our lives and our worship and our way of being together as a community. I feel like that's something. I wonder if Rick Sandler, I don't know if he would change anything that he'd said if he was writing this book a few years after he did, after the sort of pandemic But if people's experience who have joined us online or who are currently online, is it all different of what it's like to be together and to worship together in this newish way?
Well, I guess my first Quaker meeting was online because I was a little confused from the website whether or not it was in person as well. And so I had this desire to go in person, but I wasn't sure, but I knew that it was online, so I was like, okay, I'll go online, and then that's also a safe way to check it out, so I can always turn off the computer if I really wanted to. But I'd done a lot of reading and about what Quakers were and like what to expect from. Like I'd watched all the Quaker Speak videos online, and I was like, I'm ready. I've done all my research, and I had this sense of like worry that like just watching it on Zoom. So I've been in college on Zoom. It's not the most connecting thing when you're trying to teach a class or when you're trying to take a class, because I've done both online. But there we were. We were like, I think we were sitting in bed to watch the meeting. And I did feel that sense of centeredness. Like I still felt like I could see everyone sitting together, looking at each other in the meeting. And because there was that sense of like being able to kind of like bounce, kind of like what Howard was saying about like how you like look at people during a meeting, and that can kind of center you as well. I felt almost safer to do that from online because like in person I get nervous to look at people in the eye. But I had that sense of centeredness that I wouldn't have gotten if I was just trying to sit in my bed by myself. So it was still pretty. I do prefer being in person, but I still felt those adequate's not the right word, because if I couldn't come in person, then it's still just as good, I think.
I know that certain meetings are a little more strict about their Zoom use. When I was up in DC, they actually had the TV right in the middle of the floor where everybody could see who's online. It's not, somebody has their back to them. It's in the middle of the room, everybody can see it. Some of the other ones I've joined in on, like they want to make sure you have to have your camera on. You have to put on there what your name is, where you're at. Like they want that connection that you are present in the meeting, not just kind of peeking through the cracks.
Thanks for talking about how other meetings do it. That's I find that useful.
We have time for a break in the middle.
Oh, okay. Let's do it.
Here's some snacks on the other side of the door.
How long do we want to take here? It's 10:02 right now. Do we want to say at 5 minutes here?
5 minutes.
5 minutes?
Bring your stuff in, just don't drop crumbs.
How many minutes did you say, Mary?
5 sounds good.
Okay, so 10:07 we'll start back up.
Good. Yeah. Great. Sleeping well. Yeah. I'm curious what the month is. Congratulations. Thank you. Yes. Still sort of.
The pictures are beautiful.
Yeah, still sort of coming out of the beautiful clock. Is it like Saturday or Sunday?
My grandmother.
They grow all over in here. All over in here. I don't know if that's where they were.
Are they like the dominant form of banana there? That would be.
No, you also have big rooms, you know, really big green ones.
Yeah. Have you worked with the previously dominant strain of banana? So the dominant form of banana, like 70 years ago, was a strain that knocked out that plant. So we're all aiming for like the second and third favorites from back then. Yeah.
I don't hear it.
8 years ago, it was in the New Yorker, one largest than that. You like that? Yeah. Very loud, like glug, 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 glug. It's no way.
Not bad. Extremely busy and a little crazy.
The week or the session?
The week.
Oh, okay.
Oh, you asked about
I
the
was
session.
shocked. I didn't know that sure this. I was like,
No, no, no,
how did
no.
it get busy? Okay.
No, that was the week. Session's been good. 30 years ago, somebody told me that the reason it works different to be a meeting than to try to sit and meditate by yourself had to do with fractal numbers. Well, I don't know much about fractal numbers or anything, but I took that to mean there's power in the group.
Right. Yeah, somehow tied back to Fibonacci's, golden number.
Well, since I don't know that either.
I know, it's hard. I'm sitting there, that caught me, that just went in and went
Well,
over.
I mean, it's amazing that it's stuck to me since I didn't understand their comparison in the
Yeah.
first place.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. One of the things that struck me as we talk about community, especially in the readings in this chapter, is that it makes me think about groups of people that have gotten together and have a very strong sense of community but have excluded others. And I think Quakers went through some periods like
Oh,
that.
they definitely did. I mean, it's at the first of this chapter about how you couldn't get baptized, you
Yeah,
couldn't
yeah.
get married, you couldn't get buried.
Yeah, and it was
by
survival.
the local church.
Yeah. But it's interesting. There's a balance there.
And of course, people were arrested for years.
That's so interesting. I was reading something yesterday from my classes, and it was sort of like talking about the theology of the cross and sort of saying that there's a difference between identity and what was the contrast? And it was sort of like to follow theology of the cross, part of this book is arguing means an emptying out, and your identity becomes the lack of identity. And it was sort of like, but as soon as you assume an identity, like, well, we are this or that, we follow this, then you've assumed an identity, which is different than the theology of the cross, which is just our identity is not having one, not being bound by something.
Which is different than stripped naked because you are all in the same
Right. Assuming.
positioning.
Right. Conforming to us, however radical, a rigid perception. Anyway, I like to read. I'm not articulating very well, but that is, it's interesting. I think it's connected to this idea of like being a part of something without excluding whoever's not a part.
Yeah, I think of that maybe in extremely simple terms of if I'm driving down the road and I get kind of irritated with somebody who cut in front of me, it's, I can stew in that, but I can also think, maybe that person's like me. I'm trying to get home. I want to get home.
Usually I say something I regret and then I begin to try to think of it.
Because it's almost tied, that emptying of yourself, it's almost tied to releasing an ego, releasing such a strong sense of self that I can accept that others are.
Wow.
Yeah. Maybe that language of like stripping naked and being just as we are, and I wonder about, like, I definitely am not just saying everything that comes into my mind all the time. Like, it would be bad. I just have lots of thoughts that are not helpful. So, like,
it occurs to me. I never thought about this, but early. Not necessarily just Quakers, but back in that ferment of the mid 1600s in England, when we had all these people called Seekers, many of whom later became Quakers, and the Ranters and the Levelers, all these various groups of people who were just looking for something new spiritually. There were groups, and I think some of them were Quakers who would walk, obviously in groups. Walk through a town naked, and they said they did it, quote unquote, for a sign.
Wow.
And I don't know exactly what the sign was supposed to be, but maybe it was a sign that you were supposed to, it was a literal sign of the metaphorical stripping naked. I don't know, but people would do that.
Taylor on the donkey.
Yep.
I don't think he was naked. At least that's not my understanding of the story.
Yeah, I think that's you're thinking of Lady Godiva and Jesus riding into Jerusalem, kind of all together there. Maybe that's what. But yeah, I could see that. But yeah, people used to apparently parade around naked for a sign.
It must have been quite startling in that day and time.
I think so.
Startling now.
Yeah, it would. Yeah. Occasionally, you see people do that here in demonstrations, but it's usually to, to call people's attention to something. I'm not sure the nakedness itself is the point, but apparently it was at one point. Yeah. So we're not doing that anymore. Are we gathered back together? Yeah. We'll wait a minute. I've just been hearing some very rich conversation, so that I guess Chip and James and Mary and I think one other person were talking there, and that was I was liking hearing that. Without doing too much of a abrupt change of course, and maybe I'll ask people if they have any reflections on what was going on before we before we had our brief break. Anyone want to contribute anything else?
I don't know if we're already planning on covering it, but the next section that in italics starts, we each have a limited understanding. I was curious about some of what was in there.
Let me see, where is that? We will. Well, what? You know what? Is that Bo? I think I recognize your voice.
Brad.
Brad, sorry, Brad. Well, maybe you could just talk about what struck you there, and we'll just go with that. That sounds good.
Sure. Page 53, and for me, the part that was striking starts in the middle. Fox had. I'll just read that part. Fox had to remind a meeting of women friends that they should not expect everyone to have the same insight, so that it was the responsibility of those with better understanding to help those with less. And then the passage below more or less supports that. Mm-hmm. And it struck me as somewhat out of step with kind of contemporary, I don't know, avoidance of elitism. And I mean, I see the practical value in it, that some people have certain skills that are in areas that are better than others, and so on. But I'm just curious what like current thought is on this topic, and also it seems like it possibly could conflict with the idea of trying to like lose your ego in a meeting if you're thinking of yourself as a leader or somebody who has a responsibility to be a spokesperson like for the group.
Just after that quote on the screen I have up, you see where it says, "It is perhaps surprising." I don't know if someone just wants to read that and maybe a little bit onto the next screen there.
It is perhaps surprising that the recognition of different abilities did not lead friends to adopt the practice of other churches and ordain certain people to the ministry. Something like this did happen later in America, in fact. But they were adverse to setting certain people above others so as not to lose the benefit of all participating. Some who are weak in understanding may be strong in something else, like practical help or ability to listen. The ministry is then mutual. The community grows as everyone gains confidence in themselves to give what they can, and confidence in others to give what they need. This brings us to the next point.
And thanks. And of course, the next point is that we have different gifts. I think you saw in that parenthetical expression they alluded to something like this, like having ordained ministers was later to happen in America. And this happened in several ways. One is there are now branches of Quakerism that have actually even paid pastors. We don't do that, of course. But also, and someone else who's more steeped in Quaker history, maybe Mary or someone here, can jump in. But there was at one point, they had elders who were recognized and then recognized as ministers, and their messages in meeting and some of the things they had to say, the community were given a lot of weight. And there was even, if you go to older meeting houses, there's what they call a facing bench. So there was the setup we have, but then there was a little higher bench that faced everybody in the room, and the recognized elders would sit on that bench during worship and other times. I'm pretty sure, well, contemporary, at least in our flavor of Quakerism, we have gotten off of that for sure, and maybe even reacted a little bit against it. You know, this idea of having recognized elders. You know, obviously any human community is going to have functions that look like leadership. You know, just because of personalities and things. But we've really gotten off of that idea of recognized elders. We now have a verb that we use to elder someone. So it's a function, not a person. You know, well, we you know, the committee met with a person who had some problematic behavior, and we eldered them. You know, is the phrase you'll find. But I would say, yeah, that to my mind, that is a little bit off of where contemporaries would see things, at least in our flavor of Quakerism. I don't know. That's my answer to that.
I don't think the spirit is stagnant within a person. It'll go up and down whenever the spirit moves an individual.
The other thing I was thinking is that if we're meeting someplace like an auditorium that has fixed seating, obviously we're not seating in the round. And sometimes there will be a row of seats behind the speaker. Often organizers, for example, at the gathering that was held in July, there were like 15 chairs back there, and they were all people who were involved with having organized that meeting. At South Central yearly meeting, there may just be the table of 3 people, the clerk, the recording clerk, and the associate clerk. But you're still doing the in the round to the extent that the space allows it.
And you would see that at our business meeting every month. We have a table, we call it the clerk's table up there in front, facilitating what's going on. And discerning.
We have that kind of for worship. The person that we have each week that kind of manages the meeting for worship, could that be person considered the elder of the group? They kind of...
We call them worship and ministry, but yeah, that's kind of an elderly function.
It's a committee, and there are only 3 of us on the committee. And by the way, I'm the person, the only, you said managing worship, the only function currently that the worship and ministry has is that one of us is designated each first day to close the meeting. You know, to signal when the meeting's over and facilitate some announcements at the end. And in fact, I have that function today, and I will be doing it remotely.
That's going to be interesting.
Yeah, well, we've done it before, but
Okay.
I can't break the silence by shaking hands, as we would normally do. I'll have to just start talking. My apologies, friends. I had a long day yesterday. It included 4 hours of work, 8 hours of driving, 2 hours of being in a prison, and I over-caffeinated, and so I had some sleep problems last night. That's basically why I'm here and not there. Any other thoughts here?
I think the phrase in here, what strikes me about this discussion too, and that whole paragraph, now when women met together in the light and the power, and all of that discussion, it kind of speaks to me a little bit differently. Perhaps it shows that even whenever these quotes were made in the 1600s, that we were on a journey that we're still on today, that we're still on that same journey. We may be in a different place on that journey, but we're still in that same place, if that makes sense. That's kind of how I read that paragraph.
I like that because when I read it as well, I had that like a little bit of like, I don't know, like hesitation, because I was like, oh, some people have more insight than other people. And then as I was reading further, and I liked the way that they explained that, like, maybe some people, and I think I've read in another place that it's like some people are really good at speaking about things and putting something into words, and other people might not always have the right words to say something, but that doesn't mean that they wouldn't still have the same insights. And so you would still need all of those voices to get to that truth. I think you wouldn't get if you always just let the one person who's very good at speaking stand on top of the stage and tell everyone what they think, because I've seen pastors when I was younger, like I've watched them, like when I first started listening to them, they were a new pastor, they were like very connected with everyone, trying to make sure they were listening to everyone, but then I watched over the years as they would kind of settle into their role and kind of forget to bounce their ideas off of other people. And you can see them kind of like, you start to wonder if it's really them speaking what they think God wants to say to the congregation or their own opinion. And so I think that can get lost. And so I really like that we have this like round table and making sure everyone has space. And like what you were saying, where it can flow over time. So like, yeah, so it's like maybe it's some weeks people are more connected than other weeks. And, I think that's good to recognize too.
If you look at that last sentence on the screen I have up, and all these manifold gifts are found to be necessary, which is another reason for not setting some apart as holy. I like that. Thanks for those contributions. This is all, I find this all pretty enriching. Maybe this is veering off a little bit on a detail which is touched on here, but isn't enlarged upon. There's a mention of separate meetings of women. And there are some historical things we could say about that. How does that land with people who maybe are seeing this for the first time or that sort of thing? What do you think about that?
I think when I first heard historically that women had their own meetings, I was like, I knew for that time period that itself was radical, to have like an equally important, and I know that like roles in people's lives were very separate in their spheres of influence, especially during those time periods. And so I think having a space for allowing women to govern and roundtable discussion themselves probably was like, it was like as equal as they could be for that time with where they were. And I think that like we're on this journey of how to be more equal with each other. And so as we've started recognizing as a society that we're all kind of human, I think that it's great that we're all together in the same space now, because it's more fitting.
Yeah, well, a lot of you probably know, if you don't know much about Quakers historically, you might know two things about Quakers: is they were really big about the abolition of slavery, and they were also big on women's rights. A lot of the early, as they called them, suffragettes, women's rights advocates, were Quaker or Quaker adjacent. And my understanding is that the women's meetings were at the initiative of the women themselves. The other thing, because of the nature of the broader culture, I know there's a comment by, I think it's Lucretia Mott, the famous 19th century Quaker abolitionist and suffragist. She commented that the reason they have women's meetings is because, given the way the culture was, women might be too deferential to men if they were all met together, and they might not be able to might be inhibited to speak their truth. And so perhaps it's a sign of the progress we have made is that we're able to meet together now, and women are take an equal part in Quakerism as men do now. Margaret Fell, who eventually ended up marrying George Fox when they were older, had a famous piece she wrote on the necessity of women speaking in meeting. And I'm getting the title wrong, and maybe Mary or someone or James or someone who's more conversant with that part of Quaker history could throw that in. But yeah.
It was Vindication, I think, of
Vindication. Thank you. I knew I didn't have the title right. Yeah.
And the basic argument, I think, was that if it was women who found that the tomb was empty and met the risen Christ, and if they hadn't said anything, then Christianity just wouldn't have happened. So it was foundational to the very existence of it. So the idea that women shouldn't say anything is just
very silly.
Yeah. The word silly reminds me. There's I guess somewhere in here, Ambler talks about how after the second or third generation, Quakers got a little more rigid, and got very prescriptive for a while, and that lasted up in some quarters up into the 20th century. About what kind of clothes you could wear, who you could marry, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Measuring the length of the tassels on your horsehair sofa to see if it was too showy, that kind of thing. Margaret Fell, toward the end of her life, she outlived George Fox, and she died in the first year or two of the 18th century. But she has a very late thing. She was starting to see that happen, and she wrote a piece against that. She talked about how Quakers were telling folks you can't wear colorful, pretty clothes or bows in your hair. Obviously they were policing women's dress. And she says, "This is," and I love this phrase, "that is a poor, silly gospel." And I got to admire her for that, as one admires her for everything I think that ever came out of her pen.
Howard.
Yeah.
One of the things that makes me think is the, put simply, is perhaps, walking through the front door of the meeting house doesn't make me perfect, but maybe it'll help show me the way a little bit. Because there's plenty of certainly individually, I know my own imperfections. I'm very aware of many of them, probably not all of them. But even as a group of people, we've had our imperfections. We certainly have had fingers and things some that we're proud of and some that we're not proud of. Here in Texas with indigenous schools, as an example.
Mm-hmm. And
so I was just going to say, I think that it gives us an opportunity to be honest with each other in front of each other, and perhaps communally we do find a path closer to perfection, if that's the right way to think of it.
Thank you. That, in other words, what just occurred to me as you were saying that, Chip, that idea of us as individuals, standing vulnerably, stripped naked, could also be true of us as larger groups, as a community, a Quaker community. We have to be vulnerable as a community. I'm thinking of a book that there was an actual study group on, called "Fit for Freedom, Not for Friendship," and it's a critique. Quakers love to pat ourselves on the back about our role in abolitionism, abolition of slavery. But this book is a reminder. Is a reminder that, well, yes, we did participate in efforts to abolish slavery. We were not free of racism in the Religious Society of Friends, and that's a, you know, that idea of that self-critique, I think, is real important on a group basis, not just an individual basis.
I guess I'm curious from the perspective of worship and ministry, as brought to a question you'd actually asked earlier about sort of managing worship and who does that. And thankfully, it really hasn't happened in a long time, or even really since I've been here, that we've had any disturbance that was sufficiently extreme that someone did need to intervene during meeting for worship. But if there was something like that, who would do it? I feel like I probably maybe just go for it, just since I tend to have a little bit of an action bias, I feel like, in my self. And then also, like, whether worship and ministry would be, who's sort of there to... our norms are much less tight than they were in the sort of mid-19th century, where you would be probably, someone would come up to you if your skirt wasn't the right length or you were wearing the wrong shade of gray or something. But yeah, I feel like we still do, as a community, have norms. If someone were to...
I have heard of when somebody was saying something that was inappropriate or extremely long, other friends standing up in the room to try to hint to them they should sit down and shut up. I have never seen it done.
And the other thing, you know, when we say worship and ministry committee, it's not that we are the arbiters or the managers of worship per se. The committee, as I guess the Care and Counsel Committee, has a special care for these concerns. We're the ones that are more visibly there to do that. But I would hope anyway that if a friend feels strongly led, you know, to do something, they might just do it, whether or not they're on this committee. I know that, you know, every once in a while, the 11 o'clock hour passes and there's still a lot of noise and people are talking, you know, and someone will get up and say, the worship hour has begun. You know, and it's not necessarily someone on worship and ministry, right? I'm just to give a trivial example. But one would hope that we all have a care for those things.
I have been in a meeting where someone was speaking and they began to cry, and someone else, not from worship and ministry, just went over and put an arm around them, and then both of them sat down. On the other hand, I have also heard people say that the noise of small children enhances meeting. Usually gives me the giggles, but that's different.
Definitely, from my perspective, it's what I guess what in scriptural terms a joyful noise, you know.
Yeah.
But not everybody feels that way, by the way. I mean, there are folks that...
And not every child is joyful when they make a noise.
yeah.
I know in some of the more historical meetings, the meeting is much more freelance. There's not a kind of established regulation to it. It's everybody just kind of hangs out in the hall, and then they just, like a beehive, just know it's time to come in. They just come in and they sit down, and it just goes. And then there's nobody that says, there's 10 minutes left, or, it's
A couple of meetings in a yearly meeting, have somebody who stands out in the hall and tells you if you're too late to come in. And then you can sit in the anteroom.
I know these meetings, like, there wasn't that hour-long regulation on it. It was however long it went, if people were still talking, it
Yeah,
would
I
still
think
go.
that's right.
And it would end by one person getting up and just shaking a hand, then the whole room would just erupt. And there was no, like, okay, it's time, let's go. It was just, everybody was just in peace in there.
I have told this story before. The meeting I was in before this was in Hong Kong, and the Quakers met in a room at the Anglican Cathedral. Well, the Anglicans had a bell that rang at noon, so we always used that as our signal to end the meeting. And one Sunday morning we sat there, and we sat there, and we sat there, and finally someone stood up and their message was, "The bell is broken."
But that idea that, yeah, meetings organically come together and then, dissolve as, as friends are led. I love to try. I think we've done that. We've had to do this has been not in the most recent years, but some time ago, we have done retreats where that, like on a Saturday, where that's kind of what we do, so we can have that experience. Because the problem is with modern life, everyone's on a schedule, and I wish it weren't so. I wish. I do like that occasionally, very often. Everyone's kind of buzzing around, and then there's one person who is sitting there still.
Mm-hmm.
And then that kind of catches on, and the next person begins to sit still. And then suddenly there's a certain critical mass, and suddenly, we're in worship. I guess that's about as close as we get to it. And that doesn't happen every day, every first day, but I've always really, really appreciated when that happens. It's a little thing, perhaps, but I think it's very meaningful. I wish we could end that way too, but unfortunately, we're all on schedules, and so we've always ended at noon, after an hour. And we, like I said, we've tried. We've done retreats where we just kind of let it go on and then end as we are led, which is always very meaningful. I wanted to call attention. We've only got a few minutes left, about 8 minutes here. I wanted to call attention to very much toward the end here. And I'm afraid we're skipping over a lot of good stuff. No, I'm not going to find it. But there's a point where he talks about almost a sequence of things that happen. He says there's worship, that is us coming together. Then there may be ministry, that is something a person was led to share, that appears to come from Spirit. And then after that, there could be a leading that someone has. And the leading might be an individual, and that can turn into a concern that a fixed concern that the individual has, that they might share with the group, and the group might make their own. In other words, worship, ministry, leading, concern. And I bring that up because those are very Quaker terms, and you're going to hear them So, John Woolman, the 18th century Quaker, very famous for being really one of the motors behind making Quakers into a consistently abolitionist, group. Died in 1772. John Woolman, in his journal describes almost that process: the worship, then him ministering as he is led, finally having a leading to go around and be with Quakers who were involved in slaveholding of the slave trade, and then finally a concern which became a concern of the entire religious society of France. So that would be an example. I wanted to throw that out because I just felt that was I'd never thought of it, as a sequence of things that happened. Maybe that's too cut and dry. So, friends, we got about 5 minutes left. Is there? I'll just be quiet and see if friends have anything else to share.
Howard, would you consider taking the screen sharing off so we could see friends who are online as well?
I will definitely do that. Let me stop sharing.
Okay, thank you.
Just a reflection on how what we're talking about today sort of connects to an ongoing concern in this meeting, the sort of diversity of gifts that friends have, and how rather than concentrating all of the responsibility and all of the authority and action into a figure of a minister or priest, we sort of distribute it in the community. And part of how we acknowledge those gifts is by sort of service within our different committees. So we have sort of the various functions of the meeting and of the community spread out, and so that people with different gifts and different interests and things that they can share can participate in that way and take that. And it's good to know that that system is struggling though right now. It really is. It's just a main function of contemporary life. It's just hard to have that sort of commitment and that sort of way of participating in a sort of volunteer way. I think careers and lives are just so consuming. But if you do feel led, if you have gifts to share, that it really is how Quakerism works. So it's important to do that.
I like that on page 62, they're talking about the leading and concern. Before I came to this meeting, when I was married, I belonged to a Methodist church for quite a few years, and eventually I felt I was getting shunned by some of the women, and I had no clue why. Nobody told me, or there was no discussion, and I got to the point where I stopped going. And I'm glad that people discuss things here. So.
One tangential question I have is how does someone become part of the meeting officially? Like we've alluded to that you can be part of a meeting, you move and you like transfer to the other meeting. But how does that actually happen?
There is a fairly formal process. You write a letter to Caring Council, and a clearness committee is formed that meets with you at least once, sometimes more than once. And your name, at the recommendation of the clearness committee, your name is brought forward for membership.
So you initiate it by writing a letter
Yes.
to the clerk of the meeting saying, I'd like to explore membership. And then we take it from there. James right now is the clerk of our meeting, by the way.
Yeah, I think typically nowadays we've been sending it to Caring Council, but I would just send it to Caring Council.
Either way.
Yeah.
Okay.
Same.
To the same place.
Yeah.
Besides, it sounds like it's hard to get people fully on committees or not, the committees filled. What are other ways that our meeting is not, I don't know a better word, but not as at peak health, in its best form?
I think the fact our committees are fully personed and that some people have been on them for a long, long time is probably the biggest worry I have in terms of how things are functioning.
Is there usually more like transfer between committees, like people kind of?
Well, people do, and we have a nominating committee. We have a committee for everything.
Excellent.
The nominating committee's job is to find people willing and able to serve on committees. And they bring that to business meeting.
I think if I was to worry about the health of the meeting, which I'm not, but I think one thing that I was worried about was the it's very ageist, but the age of the people here, and I think in the last year or so, seeing I'll say a resurgence and more young people in meeting is very heartening. That to me, seeing a diversity of age is important. I think one other thing too, we talk about ministry, vocal ministry, and I think for me, that's a harder thing. It's less of an indication to me of concern with the meeting, the amount of vocal ministry. There are meetings and enough where they'll be very quiet, and then there'll be some meetings that are less quiet, and I find that less of a concern to me because it could be, like Irene said, maybe some ebb and flow. Sometimes those silent meetings can be very meaningful to me too.
Well, thanks, friends. I think we're at the end of our hour and 50 minutes, so we'll leave it there and let us settle into worship. Thank you.